When we hear Roman legion, we immediately imagine ranks of armored soldiers, eagles on standards, and unbreakable discipline. But few people ever wonder how many men actually made up a legion, how they lived, what they ate, and how much they carried with them. What did their camp look like, and how much space did the column take up on the march? And was a legion really just 5,000 soldiers with pila and scuta? The answers to these questions are much more complex and interesting than they might seem at first glance. Today, we won't just count legionaries, but we'll break down the entire structure, logistics, and scale of this amazing war machine that held the empire together for centuries, from Britain to Syria. Welcome, you're on the Amazing History channel, and today we have one of those episodes after which you won't be able to look at the news or the Roman army the same way again. Thank you for joining us again. You inspire us to dig deeper, search more precisely, and explain more clearly. Special thanks to our subscribers and sponsors. It's thanks to you that we can create quality historical content. If you're here for the first time, welcome. It's going to be interesting. And if you've been with us for a while, you already know that the most exciting part is about to begin. Let's go. So, let's start with the most important element of the legion, the legionary. He's not just a soldier, he's a Roman citizen who completed selection, training, and took the oath. Typically, these people were recruited from rural areas, strong, resilient, and not influenced by city life. Historian Vigezzi wrote the ideal candidate had to be at least 6 Roman feet tall, or about 172 centimeters. After being drafted, the recruit underwent about 4 months of intensive training, learning to march, fight, dig trenches, build fortifications, and importantly, endure. After that, he was assigned to a small but key unit. A contubernium is a group of about 8 soldiers who lived, ate, built camp, and served together, essentially a military family. It was led by a decanus. Don't confuse him with the one who gives lectures at a university. This decanus didn't have an officer's rank, but he was responsible for the discipline and daily life of his men. Each contubernium was also assigned 1 or 2 military slaves and a couple of mules, which carried the tent, millstones for grinding grain, stakes, cauldrons, and other equipment. When the legion set up camp, everything worked like clockwork. Some set up the tent, others went for firewood, and others ground grain. In the evening, they had a simple dinner of flatbread, porridge, salted meat, and wine. If time allowed, they played dice, chatted, or lounged and complained. Life in the contubernium was cramped but close-knit. It's no wonder that in Latin there was even the word contubernalis, something like a tent brother, a comrade to the corps. But the contubernium was just the beginning for real combat missions. Such mini-groups were too small, so 10 contubernia were combined into a century, about 80 soldiers plus support staff, mules, and tents. The name might be confusing, 100 people, right? Yes, century sounds like 100, but the Romans didn't really bother with exact numbers when it came to organizational units. The centurion, a tough veteran, led the century with strict discipline and control over his subordinates' lives. His main tool was the vitis, a vine staff, which he could use both to point the way and to whack any sluggish legionary. He was assisted by the optio, his deputy, and the tesserarius, a kind of sergeant responsible for night watches and passwords. There was also the standard bearer, the signifer, and the cornicularius, a clerk and trumpeter in one, who helped summon the soldiers and keep records. If the century was a brick of the Roman army, then the cohort was a full-fledged building block. One cohort united 6 centuries, which gave it a strength of about 480 legionaries. The main advantage of the cohort was its self-sufficiency. Inside it there were soldiers, slaves, pack animals, officers, and even some small artillery. It could autonomously complete tasks, guard an outpost, build defenses, join raids, and if needed, defend alone. There were a total of 10 such cohorts in a legion, and the first cohort was special. You could even call it elite, unlike the others. It consisted of 5 centuries with double the number of men, not 80, but about 160 people each. The cohort had a total of about 800 soldiers selected from the most experienced battle-tested veterans. Serving in the first cohort was an honor. It led in battle during the most dangerous times, set an example for others, and carried the Legion's main banner, the Silver Eagle. Losing it was worse than dying. At the head of each cohort stood the senior centurion, usually commanding the first century. He did not have a separate rank or his own staff, but in fact, he performed the duties of the commander of the entire cohort. He made the key decisions and was responsible for the group's actions. Interestingly, even with a strict structure, centuries and cohorts could act autonomously. This gave the Romans incredible flexibility on the battlefield. They could break up the army like a mosaic shield, adapting to the enemy's tactics and the terrain. And in peacetime, cohorts were calmly sent to different corners of the empire for guarding, building roads, or suppressing rebellions. When you hear the word legion, you usually imagine a formation of 5,000 identically armed soldiers marching into battle to the sound of a trumpet. But in reality, a legion was much larger both in numbers and in complexity. It was more than a combat unit. It was a small army with its own logistics, medicine, engineering, administration, and artillery. So, in a classic Imperial Legion, there were 10 cohorts. We already know that 9 of them had 480 soldiers each, and the first one had about 800. This gives us about 5,120 legionaries, the so-called paper strength, but that's just the beginning. To this number, officers were added, about 295 people throughout the structure, from centurions to the legate, the commander of the legion. Next, slaves maintained camps, carried loads, and prepared food. There were around 1,400 of them, and just as many pack animals, mostly mules. Why so many? Because we already know that each contubernium had at least one mule, sometimes even two, to carry tents, millstones, food, and tools. In addition, the legion had cavalry, about 120 horsemen divided into 4 turmi of 30 men each. This wasn't a heavy strike force. It handled reconnaissance, flank protection, communications, and command staff security. The engineering corps, about 10 men, 1 per cohort, were in charge of building camps, bridges, and siege engines. The artillerymen operated up to 60 Scorpios, 1 per century, and 10 ballistae, 1 per cohort. Medics, about 10 doctors and 20 assistants, plus medical tents and wagons. Scribes and clerks, about 15 people who handled all calculations, from salaries to food supplies. In total, if you put it all together, that's about 7,000 people plus 1,600 animals, not counting the herds of cattle that were driven along for fresh meat. All of this formed a large mobile system that could operate autonomously on a campaign for weeks. So, when we say Roman legion, we don't just mean an army. It's an organism, well-tuned, disciplined, and frighteningly effective. But to truly understand what the Roman legion was, numbers alone aren't enough. It's important to imagine the space it occupied. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Castrum camp. In peacetime, the legion was based in a permanent camp. These camps were built according to a template, a rectangular shape, a strict grid of streets, defensive walls, towers, a moat, and inside, barracks, warehouses, hospitals, workshops, headquarters, and a sanctuary for the legion's eagle. The average legion camp spanned about 220,000 square meters, roughly equal to 30 football fields. Yet, in such a massive fortress, all 7,000 people were seldom there at once. The soldiers often served outside the camp, guarding the borders, building roads, or going on campaigns. On a campaign, while marching, the legion advanced in a strict column. Scouts and vanguard led, followed by command, main legionaries, supply train, and rear guard. The column was narrow, at most 6 men wide, to fit on Roman roads, in this order. The entire column of 7,000 men and almost 2,000 animals stretched for about 2 kilometers. That's in good weather and on flat terrain. On bad roads or in the mountains, the column could double in length to 4 kilometers. Imagine, a single legion could occupy an entire valley in battle. On the battlefield, the legion would deploy from a marching column into a battle line. In ideal conditions, its front could reach 600 meters and the depth of formation was over 130 meters, meaning the legion occupied an area the size of an entire city block. It was usually formed in 3 lines, following classic Republican tactics. 4 cohorts stood at the front, followed by 3 in the second line and 3 more in reserve. The cavalry and some officers were placed in the third echelon. To give you an idea of the scale, an ancient archer's bow had a maximum range of 200 meters, so a single archer couldn't even cover the entire width of the legion with his shot. And if you were standing on one flank, the soldiers on the other would look like silhouettes on the horizon. That's how far apart they were. Coordinating movements, relaying commands, and maneuvering required real military discipline. Any mistake in rhythm or command could turn into a disaster, and that's exactly why the legions were famous for their training. Everything I've told you before about centuries, cohorts, and logistics, the formation concerns only a single legion. But now imagine that at the height of its power, the Roman Empire maintained more than 30 legions simultaneously scattered from Britain to Egypt, from Iberia to Mesopotamia. There were about 30 of these mini-armies, each with 5,000 soldiers, 1,500 slaves, herds of mules, supply depots, and artillery. Each legion had a unique name, number, symbol, and reputation. Some guarded the borders, others built roads and forts, and others fought in wild lands for new territories. Commanding all these forces was a true bureaucratic and logistical machine. Maps, reports, dispatches, calculations, supply routes, correspondence through couriers, and even forts specially built as staging points were created. The empire relied on swords, records, schedules, and inventories to stay united. The Roman legions were not just an army, they were the infrastructure of conquest and control. Their numbers, organization, and mobility allowed them to operate like a well-coordinated machine, where every man, every mule, and every tent had its place and its purpose. Such was the Roman legion, not just troops, but a finely tuned war machine, blending discipline, flexibility, and engineering precision. Its scale is truly something to consider in order to understand how Rome ruled half of the known world. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to subscribe and see you in the next episode of Amazing History. Goodbye, everyone.